Okay, if you can give me your name and Stephen and your birth date and where you were born.
My name is Stephen Sapp. Birthday is May 12th, 1966. I was born and raised in the South Bronx, New York City.
The South Bronx. And what was the date again? I'm sorry.
Stephen Sapp.
But the date of
May 12th, 1966.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're pretty young. Okay. Any brothers and sisters? Or?
I got one sister. She's 5 years younger than me. 5 years younger than me. That's just the two of us.
Just your parents' name?
Same, Patricia Sapp, Stephen Sapp. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, these are more like oral history. So
Yeah.
Human type of thing.
Yeah.
So, what was it like? Just a little brief background of what it was like growing up in the Bronx and that, because I'm not familiar with the Bronx.
Well, the Bronx in particular that I remember was, and I'm from the projects of the Bronx, and I remember
what projects?
Forest projects in the Bronx, and I just really remember there being bombed out, or what looked like bombed out buildings. There were blocks. You can go for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks, and a lot of the tenement buildings were burnt out. And I'm old enough to remember the 70s where landlords, mostly the Jewish landlords, would burn out apartment buildings. They would pretty much come on a Tuesday and say everyone has to move out of the building by Friday, and for insurance, and burn it. And so there was stretches of time where you could go for blocks and there was nothing there.
But I mean, did they own the project?
No, the projects were different. The projects were separate, but everything around the project was burnt out. So when you left the project, you literally walked through what looked like war.
So this was around the 70s?
I was born in 66, so what I remember is like when I'm being 4 and 5, so like 1970, 71, 72. So I remember when the Panthers, especially in New York, were around, and when the Young Lords, the New York chapter of the Young Lords, with the garbage offensive, that's what we were looking at.
Well, you saw that?
Yeah.
I mean, literally.
I literally saw mounds and mounds of garbage. I remember that was kind of like, and then you had rats running through the garbage. So when we were little kids playing, and if you were playing near the street where the garbage was, that's what you saw. So the projects were the projects. Everybody was stacked on top of each other, and this is before crack, so it wasn't all crazy in terms of, but it's still a project living. You know, we had free cheese. The government's giving out free cheese, so you're still in line.
That was all period.
Yep, and you got your block of free cheese. So my life was pretty much consisted of project living and the tenement buildings.
Okay, so free cheese, that means your family were on welfare at the time?
We were on welfare.
That was part of the welfare.
That was part of it, yeah. And so that's, for me.
Was it everybody like that on welfare in the projects? Or?
Yeah, it seemed like everybody was on welfare. It didn't look like that's just what it was. And I learned really early on, it was, for me, I figured out that it just seemed like it was just a cycle. Everybody was caught in the same thing. And that there was no way out. Like I saw my aunts and my uncles and my father, and everyone was just working class people. But it was like a ceiling and nobody was breaking out of it. Like the best thing you could do was get into the projects. You know what I mean? And I remember being young going, I don't want to die here, without seeing what's outside of the projects. And I was very conscious of that. Like, I gotta get out of here just to see something else. I don't want to die here.
Did you have other relatives that had gotten out of that?
No, everybody was kind of, it was that. So I was the first person in my entire family to go to college, to go. So, and nobody knew how to explain it to me. My mother, you know, in terms of how to fill out a college application, all that stuff, my guidance counselor did that with me.
How were you able to even get to that point where you're thinking about college? What was it growing up in grammar school and all that?
Well, I will tell you this. I had a teacher in the 2nd grade. His name was Gary Simon, and he created the ABC school, which is like a better chance. And it was like they would take inner city kids and bring them to like these prep schools. And it was like it was like in junior high school you would go to these prep schools. And he signaled out a couple of kids early, like in the 1st and 2nd grade, he thought that we were smart, and we were in class. I had 35 kids in the class, and he wanted to make sure that these particular kids who he thought were really smart can make it. So I got picked by him in the 2nd grade, and he went to our parents, and it was 8 of us, 9 of us, and we stayed after school to work. So we did our regular day in school, and then at 3 o'clock you went to Mr. Simon, and you were with him to 5, 6 o'clock, and he gave us extra stuff to do. And it was that guy who really put into our heads that Mr. Simon, that there was something else out.
Now, was he African American?
No, he's a straight white dude. And really serious about education, and really serious about teaching us. Those who he had, it was serious. So our reading scores were 2 years above what the average was. If I was in the 6th grade, my reading score was 8th grade level, because of this guy. And he's the first person I heard really talk about how to get into college. It was him. Like, you can actually go, because you thought, well, you can't either afford it or you're not smart enough. But Mr. Simon was like, you guys are just as smart or smarter than them white kids, because you come from here.
What was his angle? Was he just liberal minded?
This is a liberal dude. He was a liberal dude who was stuck in a public school as an elementary school teacher, but he had bigger visions, and we were kind of like his guinea pigs in a lot of ways. And out of the 9 of us who got picked, I think 7 of us are doing really well. 7, 8 of us.
Now, he picked you into like a program, his own program?
It was his own program in the school.
He just made it up.
He made it up. He gave us extra books to read. He gave us extra assignments to read, who he felt could handle it. Because the way that the curriculum was in the school, you did what everybody else did. And he was like, these kids, you could do something else. So it made you, when I was in the 2nd, 3rd grade, think about life in a bigger way. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's what I remember about the Bronx, and just loving it, because it was, it was communal, and it's your family.
You went home, and what about any violence or anything?
In my house, or just in the neighborhood? Oh, yeah. I mean, the regular bang bang, shoot 'em up, regular stuff, and you learn, violence, drugs, and you get desensitized to it. And maybe I think it's like you think that that's normal. So if they're shooting, you don't even blink twice because you think that's normal. If somebody gets shot, you don't blink twice because I remember being, I think it was like 8 or 9. I was coming out of the movies. It was a local movie theater, and we were coming out of the theater, and I distinctly remember this. There was a woman coming this way, and we got out the movie, and a car pulled up alongside real slow, which you kind of noticed, and the window rolled down, and I saw the shotgun come out, boom, in the side of her head, and I saw it, and drove off. And I remember being in shock of seeing something like that, and then not being in shock. That it was like, that's where we're at. Now, if you think logically, this woman just got shot down, gunned down in the street. And so you became almost desensitized to it. Where you learn to accept it, or this is what our natural existence is. This is how we live. And you learn how to navigate your way through it. You know what I mean? You don't go here, you go here. You don't talk to so-and-so, you talk to so-and-so. You need to know all the drug dealers and the drugs so nobody messes with you. I learned that quick. To not speak to people is like, nah, they don't know you. If you're not in a gang or rolling with them, if they don't at least know you, they're going to get you. So I made sure I spoke to everybody. What's up? What's up? What's up? What's up? Everybody knew me. I knew everybody. They don't bother you. If you got to fight somebody, you hurt them. So because I didn't want to fight. So I was like, if I got to do it, I got to hurt you so you don't have to come near me no more. So it was, again, it's normal violence. I mean, when I say normal violence, is what you thought as normal. Somebody getting arrested, or somebody getting shot, or somebody getting thrown off the roof, or somebody ODing. That's what it was.
Yeah, but you yourself never got arrested? Or?
Nah, because my father grew up in Harlem, and he was a take no shit type of dude. He still is. So he told me, he said, let me tell you something. All you got to do is go to school. He said, I'll clothe you, I'll feed you. You ain't got to worry about nothing. He said, all you got to do is go to school. He said, now, you don't go to school, me and you got a problem. He said, if I don't take care of you, if I don't do this, he said, people do stuff because they don't have no money or whatever. And, you know, so I'll make sure that you won't need. But he said, if you go to jail, you get strung out on drugs. Me and you gonna have a problem. And I was young. I was like 8. And I didn't know what he was talking about. But he was serious about that. So the only time me and him had any run-in was school. Because he's like, you're not stupid, you're smart. So you can do this backwards and frontwards. So if you don't do it, me and you gonna have a problem. And that's when, anytime I didn't do well in school. So in terms of getting in trouble.
So he was verbal mostly.
He was, I mean, yeah, he didn't really, I mean, if I got hit because of school. But he was a serious dude. So it was like, it wasn't like, oh, let me see. No. If he said it, he's like, if I got to come out there with you. So I stayed out. I mean, I knew everybody. And I have friends of mine who did stuff. But when it got deep, I was like, I'm not going with y'all because my father's not going to understand. I'm like, I'm not going. And I didn't. You know what I mean? I would hang out just enough. You know, you hang out, you drink your wine, you smoke your weed, you hang out with. But when it was like, oh, we're going to go do this. See y'all, I'm going home. Because my father's not going to have it. And my mother was there. My mother was in the house, and she was a housewife.
Patricia?
Patricia, yeah. She was a housewife. So I came home from school, my mother was there. She helped you with your homework. She made sure we would look nice, clothes. Even if we didn't have nothing. Because I'm old enough now to... And it's just me and my sister. So the everyday... She's younger. So I was the older one. She made sure we always... So we didn't need anything. And now that I'm older, I realized that we were poor. But you'd have never known it. Neither one of them had any addiction. So it was like the money my father made, he gave it to my mother. And it was in the house. So we had nice furniture. We had nice clothes. But we were poor. You know, I never went to bed hungry, ever. So all those things that people, and I have cousins who have done jail time, and because their home life wasn't stable. My home life was, you know, like my father would have his moments where he would be very aloof or very distant or angry at the world and didn't talk very much. But in terms of him being in the house, he was there. So I had both of them in there. So I never felt like I had to drift off and do something. They allowed me to be my age. I didn't have to grow up faster than I needed to grow up.
So what kind of work did he do?
He did a little bit of everything. He was a cook for Nedix for a long time, and then he worked for the railroad and cleaning out the pipes and the heating and ventilation in the train stations. And for Amtrak, he did that for a long time. And now he's a security guard. Carries a gun and, you know.
Your mom?
Nothing. She never worked. She stayed home, and my father, you know.
Was that a religious thing? Or?
No, she just, it's just, I think we're more old fashioned. Like, okay. Not that she couldn't work.
So more cultural.
Yeah, she just stayed home and raised, you know what, she was a mother. She's like, I'm a mother, this is my job. And she went and zoomed in on us, and to this day, to even my nephews, my sister's kids, she is that matriarch. My job is to be home to make sure the house is right.
But your father was not into the church or anything like that?
He is now.
Well,
he got saved maybe about 10 years ago. He got saved because he got to a point personally where he was low. You know, he's an old street dude from Harlem, you know, who had kids when he was 22, but still kind of wanted to hang out. And he was a good father, but you can always see he was kind of tortured. Like he would sit in the living room in my house and he used to drink. So I would come home, and if you heard music playing, I knew he was sitting in the living room. Like I'd come to the door and I hear music, I'm like, oh. And I open up the door and he would be sitting there. He'd have his vodka and he'd be drinking. And he'd see me walk by, come here. I'm like, oh, sit down. And then he'd start talking, and he would talk about philosophy. He would just talk. And at that, I don't know what he was talking about, but he would just talk, and he would just tell me things, and then send me away. And so that's how I got to know him, in terms of what a tortured man working, trying to make it in the world, living in the projects and raising a family. He would say it to me, but at 15, I know what he was talking about. but he gave that to me. Like, I completely understand it. Like, I completely know exactly what that is. You know what I mean? Like, completely. So as I got older and became a man, all these things I began to feel and experience and not quite understanding and being angry about, I can equate it with my father. Like, oh, I get it. This is what I'm feeling as a black man trying to.
Now you're getting older. You're not into church or anything.
I'm not. I'm more spiritual than going to church. I'm just like, you be a good person. You have some sense of spirituality. Going back and forth to the church thing it's nice and it's very admirable, I think. But then you start getting around people.
Now, was he in the service, your father, or anything? Where did he get his discipline?
Himself. I think it was, he used to sing when he was a kid, like 13, 14. He was in a little singing group. But I think he was always that type of dude. Yeah. So he was always that. He never went to this. He didn't go to the service. He's just a really strong dude. You know what I mean? And I think he's so proud now of me and my sister, how we turned out. Because we turned out, my sister's, we're good kids.
What was your sister's name?
Her name is Patria.
Patria?
Patria, yeah. And she's an accountant. I'm Steve Jr., yeah. And we turned out good. Like, we never wanted, we didn't get in trouble. We were almost, in one sense, boring. Considered some of my cousins were wild. My cousins were just wild and always in trouble and getting arrested and da-da-da. Me and my sister, not that we were raised middle class because we were far from it, but the way my mother and father, most of my mother had the house, the feeling of it, it felt middle class in that apartment in the projects. But we was poor as shit. You know what I mean? But you would have never known it. My cousins used to come to my house for Christmas because we used to get so much. My mother and father used to save money all year to buy us Christmas presents. That's how those two were disciplined in terms of having a family. So that's how I grew up. So I didn't,
So your parents had to, in order to keep you in line, had to also attack ghetto life. So did they do that?
My mother never acknowledged. She would always tell me, "Why you always talk about it like this? This is community. You got your friends." Like we weren't living in the ghetto to her. This is where we live, and this is beautiful. We have family, and there's a community center, and there's this, and there's a movie theater, and that, like, and my father was out there. He was out. So, but they didn't bring it home. My father never brought that element into the house. My mother wouldn't allow that element into the house. So we didn't grow up.
So he was street savvy.
He's street, and he did his dirt.
But I was outside.
It was outside. He didn't bring it into the house. The only thing he would bring, if he would drink, he would be drunk in the house. But he didn't bring dumbness into the house. He wouldn't have it. Like the house was almost his sanctuary. And so, and I appreciate that we didn't have to deal with. There's a lot of stuff I know people deal with. I didn't deal with it in my house. When you go outside, you deal with stuff. But in terms of when I went home as a kid,
did you ever see it outside?
Oh yeah, my friends, my family, my cousins, they grew up hard.
I'm saying you never saw your father in a negative.
One time, maybe 9 or 10. He used to always go to Harlem because he grew up in Harlem, so we would hang out in Harlem, and I was in the barbershop.
You don't have to answer.
No. If and I'm sitting in the barber chair, and I was watching television, and everybody from the barbershop where he said was running outside. Well, where's everybody running? So I kind of went outside, and there was a big circle, and he was beating this guy half to death in the street. And I remember being so shocked at the violence of it, of where mentally he was and how violent it was. It really surprised me. Like, and how aggressive it was. And being, as a kid, you're enamored, but I was also very like, I don't even know who that is. And it still sticks with me to this day, like, I don't know who that was. And I think it bothered him that I saw him like that, because I remember him turning and seeing me standing there, and then I gotta go home. And his hand was like this big. It swelled up. And he had to take me home, and my mother asking him, what happened to you? And him like, got into a fight. Oh my God, you got in a fight! But he tried to keep that stuff from us, which I appreciate. He never went to jail, none of that stuff. He just dumb. He could go to the bar and hang out and get drunk and stay out all night long. That's him.
Okay, so you got into the what is your political thinking?
It's funny you say that. Some cop shot somebody, and it was on the news, and it was in the Bronx, and everybody was up in arms, and this guy stood up, and he had dreadlocks, and I remember going, he just looked different, and it said his name. I don't remember what his name was, but underneath it said activist on it. And the way he spoke, I was like, I want to be that.
Some guy got shot.
Some guy got shot, and people and people were protesting, and this guy got on the news and had the camera in his face, and it had his name, and he had dread, and it said activist. And I was like, I don't know what job that is, but I want to do that, because he was, he was with the people, and I was just really paying attention to that guy, because it was something I didn't know what it was. Like, you know what a teacher is, you know what a cop is, but what's an activist? Because that's what it said on the news. And I remember that distinctly, and then I remember paying attention to what was, I knew shit around where we lived wasn't right, and that the cops did roll on us wrong, and how we were living was wrong, and rats and roaches and wrong. It's like I knew it, and so I would pay attention to the rallies, and I didn't necessarily always go, but I would pay attention to when listening to people talk. My father had this Louis Farrakhan record, and I don't even know where he got it from. And I used to play it over and over, and just really kind of listening to this fervor of people like fighting against injustice. And my mother and father wasn't into it at all. But to me, I was looking around going, if I have to live here, or people that I know and love have to live here, it don't need to be like this. I'm tired. And you look at TV, it's like that neighborhood doesn't look like this, And
So
how
your friends were also political?
No, none of them was. That's just with me. It was just in my head. They really weren't. I just felt it. It's like I grew up and it was blacks and Puerto Ricans. That's all. That's what was in the neighborhood. So to me, it's like we're all in this together. And why is it not? Why are we struggling in here together? And I'm very conscious that there's only black and Puerto Ricans here. There's no white people here. It's just black and Puerto Rican. And we're smashed on top of each other. And the elevator is broken. And you got to walk up 14 flights of stairs. And so-and-so got robbed, or somebody got shot, and the ambulance takes them 5 hours to show up. I just knew that shit wasn't right.
So people were talking about that.
I didn't know how to get involved.
But you were here.
Yeah, you were around. I mean, you did see Panther Papers. You did see Parlante, Young. You did see it. You did see a rally. We were young, so you would go and look. But since my mother and father wasn't into it, I didn't have enough guts to just, I'm going to go by myself and go to this thing. I didn't do that. But it stuck that there's something wrong, and there's people fighting for justice of these conditions that we're in, and then trying to learn, how do you change it? You know what I mean? There's congressmen and your senators, the aldermen and everybody that you saw around, but it's like they're not really kind of changing things. But that guy who I saw on television, who was an activist.
Were you in like high school or grammar school?
I was like maybe junior high school, going into high school. So when I went to college, it really was real evident. The two different worlds that existed.
As you got into college, are you getting more nationalistic also, or no?
No. What happened with college was I realized I was a minority. I didn't realize that when you grow up in the hood, you're around your folk. You don't feel like minority. You hear the word, but it's like, we're the majority here. The second I sat in college, it was 5 black men on the entire campus. That was like, I knew what the word was, and it scared me. because your first instincts, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be around people don't want me around. This isn't. I'm talking to people that they've never been around a person of color before. They don't know how to act. But I also know I'm supposed to be here, and I got to figure this out. And I got real angry because I can see the two worlds. I could be in college, upstate New York, in trees, and da-da-da-da-da, and then get on the train and ride down 2 hours and instantly be back in the project. In the same day, your world would be like, flip. I'll tell you something. It was one time I came home from college, and a friend of mine was sitting outside, who I hung out with, Puerto Rican guy. And he was like, yo, come on, hang out with, I'm like, oh man, I just got home. He's like, oh, come on. So I'm like, all right, go upstairs, literally, and go, Mom, I put my bags on, I'm going out. She's like, oh. So he takes me to Spanish Harlem where we used to hang out, and it was this guy named Mikey. Now Mikey used to run a lot of cocaine, all that stuff for all the Spanish Harlem. And he owned this tenement building. And he had an apartment on the top, and all the other apartments you can rent a room for a girl, or you smoke, or so we kind of go and smoke and hang out and drink wine. And so this particular time, everyone was hanging out in Mikey's house, which you really didn't do. So I come in and I sit out, and he knew me. He's like, what's up? Say we're drinking, we're smoking, and he comes in the room and he's like, well, looks at me, he goes, the shipment's coming in. You cool with that? And I'm like, yeah, cool. I'm trying to be like, yeah. So and they're bringing poof. So I'm sitting there going, oh shit. Because 2 hours ago, I was just in upstate New York. So I'm sitting there and I'm watching all this kind of go on. I'm trying to be cool. So about halfway through the night, I can see Mikey looking at me from across the room, not really saying nothing. And I'm like, So finally, after about an hour of him literally staring at me, I said, what's up, man? He goes, come here for a second. He's like, what you doing in here? I'm like, what? I'm hanging out. He's like, no. What the fuck are you doing in here? I'm like, Mikey, what's the matter? I'm like, I'm just hanging out. He goes, don't you go to college? I'm like, yeah. He's like, you in college? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm not saying you better than us, but you ain't got no business in here. Real shit happens in here. You understand? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I don't want to see you in here no more. Don't come in here no more. I'm like, what? I'm hanging out. He's like, don't come here no more. You come up in here, if you come in my building, we're going to have problems. Like, okay. And I always respected that. Like, I got it, what he meant. And then...
But he was a friend, right?
He was an older dude, and that's the first time he ever talked to me directly. And I got it. And for some reason, it bothered him that he knew that I was in college. And that my friend who took me there, I had to cut him off. And it hurt me to my heart. And to this day, my mother's like, I can't believe you're not friends with him. I was like, because he was my good friend. And he was sliding into that world. And when you got your friend, you're going to be sliding right there with him. If he'd have gotten into some trouble and something would have happened, he'd have called me, and I'd have went. And I was like, I can't roll like that. I can't do it. Like, I got in college as a chance to do something else. I can't roll with you. He's like, come on, man. And my crack had just came out, and it's just like, I was like, I can't. He offered me a chance. He goes, you could be the runner. All you do is just pick up the money. That's all you got to do, and we'll pay you. And for a second, I was like, well, I'm in college. I can use the extra. So money goes, yeah, but you got to carry this 9mm because, and I was like, see? He said, why won't you carry it? I said, because I will shoot somebody. You don't have no, you know what I mean? It's like, you're going to shoot somebody. So I had to leave all of them alone and really focus on, got an opportunity. I'm in school. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with myself, but I'm in school. It's a chance to do something. And I'm going to do that.
So now you're focusing on your studies and you're in theater?
Yeah, I studied theater and writing, yeah.
Why did you get into that?
Writing I always did it when I was a kid. And I was in college and they asked me, it's like, why don't you take an acting class? All right. And I liked it. and I wanted to perform, but you just don't, that doesn't relate to where we're from. So in one sense, I was doing it because I enjoyed it, thinking I'll eventually have to stop and figure something else out so I can get a job. And I just never stopped, And my mother would tell people that I was studying journalism to be a writer for the newspaper, because she didn't want to tell people that my son's studying to be a writer and he's doing theater. You can't get a job doing that. But that's what I like.
So she didn't want you in theater?
No, because where you gonna work? Where you gonna work? Who do you know that does theater? Nobody. How you gonna make a living? Her whole big thing was, you need to come home and you're gonna get a city job. They had all these jobs opening up for the railroad, for transit. She said, when you get out of college, you're gonna take the transit test. You're in college, you're gonna have a college degree. You won't have to. You can be running the trains. You can be a supervisor because you have a college degree, and you'll be set. And she had already had that picked in her mind for me, that that's what I was gonna do. And I was like, I can't do that. So I didn't come back. I stayed upstate.
Now, you were meeting other people like even Mildred at that time?
I met Mildred in college. She auditioned for a play of mine.
Oh, she auditioned for a play of yours?
Mm-hmm. I was a director, and
So how did you get to that part?
Of what?
To do plays.
Well, when you become a senior, they let you create your own.
Senior?
Yeah, when I became a senior in college, because since I was one of the only black men in the theater department, when they gave me a play to do, I was usually running from something, because all the roles for black people were racist. So I told them, whatever play y'all pick, I don't want to do it, because I don't want to be running slave. I don't want to do it. Can I create my own thing? And they were like, well, yeah, you can do whatever you want. So they left me alone. So the play I wrote was about a kid.
What college was this?
Bard College,
right.
upstate New York. And I wrote a piece about pretty much a character that was myself, who was from the inner city, who goes to a predominantly white school, and the two worlds he has to bounce in between to survive. And I call it purgatory. You didn't know which place was heaven, which place was hell. And Mildred walked in the room. She was a freshman, and I was sitting there, and she walked in the room, and I was like, okay. And I leaned over to the guy who was my assistant, and I said, that girl can stand there and say anything right now, and I'm going to put her in the show. And I kind of sat back. And she started singing. I was like, okay, good, she can sing. But we related to each other because we both she come from the Lower East Side. I was from the Bronx. We were in this predominantly white school. Both our parents are working class people. And here we are, two people trying to figure it out. And we just gravitated toward each other. And we had a sense of community, we had a sense of family. Like I said, I grew up with black and Puerto Rican. So, she's Puerto Rican. It was like, my father speaks Spanish. He learned Spanish on the street. So he speaks Spanish. So when I met Mildred's family, it felt like family. You know what I mean? My best friend who was taking me around in Spanish Harlem was Puerto Rican. And I was always at his house. So my connection to Puerto Rican culture is, it's part of me. You know what I mean?
So was your best friend in theater also?
No, he's the one that stayed. He stayed back and got caught up in some drugs, selling stuff, got arrested, and went in and out of jail. And I stayed in college.
So now, but you had all these other friends that are in theater.
You started meeting people up in college, meeting different type of people, and it was kind of like who you actually like, and they come from different worlds, and they come from different financial brackets. I mean, I had a friend of mine whose father was Arthur Rankin, who used to make the claymation cartoons like Frosty the Snowman. It says Rankin and Bass. His stepfather was Rankin. So he had, it was like money. It was just a different group of people you're around. And once I started meeting all these different people, it's like, okay, having access to other worlds, it's like, how do you get access to that and still stay true to yourself without changing? You grow up, but I was like, I'm still Steve from the Bronx, but I want to be Steve from the Bronx.
So you always thought about that, you wanted to remain true to yourself.
Mm-hmm. I was very
without changing. What didn't you want to change?
I didn't want to deny the fact that I was from the Bronx. I didn't want to deny the fact that there was elements of my childhood, which was rough, hard, and raw, I didn't want to deny the fact that, but I also learned how to be able to go in a classroom and talk this way and be around this. It can go home and hang out and be cool with everybody else. How do you take this, the rhythms, the essence of where we're from, our community, our culture, and bring that with you? You don't have to leave it there and go to college, and you bring that with you. So even with the work that we do, theater, I wanted to bring who we were, the people who I know, Ray Barretto and Marvin Gaye, with me to college, not leave it there. So I would always say, I'm Steve from the Bronx. And whatever your interpretation of the Bronx was, that's how you took me. If you thought that people from the Bronx were gangsters and them, all right, then that's what you think I am. Because, so, you know, they would think that, oh, have you ever been in a gang before? They would ask me that in college. Have you ever been shot? I was like, is that what you think? You watch TV? It's like, yeah, I know some people who've been in gangs. In gangs. I've seen people get shot. And? Does that change? Does that make any difference while we're both sitting in this college together? You know?
So how you got your degree in theater? What was it like the first play that you produced? You said it was the one about your character?
Yeah, I mean, I did that in college.
And
then after that, I didn't do theater for 5 years. Got a job. But we were working in the community, teaching reading and math at this community center, Mildred and I together.
Okay.
And then...
Now, were you married then?
No, we weren't married. We were living together, we weren't married. And that was our job. And
so you had a community center? So
we didn't have it, we worked at one.
Oh, you worked at
and then what happened
was like an activist.
Yeah, and so it wasn't really, it was social service. It wasn't active, it was more social service. And then our funding cycle was ending, and it wasn't being refunded, so we were about to all get laid off. And this other guy we knew said, why don't we start our own center? And I was like, what? We start our own center, man. I was like, and get paid how? Like, how are we going to eat? Oh, we can do this, we can do this. You do theater? Why don't we like have a theater? I was like, in the South Bronx, we're going to have a theater. He's like, yeah. So we were like, all right. So we found this abandoned bagel factory in the Bronx. And the landlord who owned that bagel factory, abandoned bagel factory, owned the same building that we were in working. So we kind of knew him. So we went to him and was like, look, we want him to start this like theater / center type thing. And he was like, uh-huh. He's like, could you give us like a year's free rent? And we'll renovate your space. And if we don't get this place up and running in a year, you can have a renovated space. And he said, all right, deal. So he gave us a year free rent, and we proceeded to go in that building. We cleaned it all out. People from the community started giving us screws, and we literally renovated that building in a year. Put a theater in there. We had businesses. We had a restaurant, a barbershop, dance studio, record store, all owned by people from the community. And then we put in, it was a social service agency called Unitas, and they were like the big sort of tenants that we had. They paid a bulk of the rent, and we ran that building. And out of that, I started doing theater again because I had theater that we built. And we did that we opened in '93. And it's funny, Yomotoro just died. The opening night of the theater, we had all these people come over, and Mildred started singing a song, and Yomotoro was there. And he walked up on stage and Mildred was singing Preciosa, and he started playing with her. I'll never forget that moment of her turning around and seeing Yomotoro standing in the South Bronx in this building we had just built, playing Cuatro. And he was so nice and so cool, and he hung out all night long. And it felt so special because we created our love, which was theater and art, and brought this back to Bronx, basically. And it was a beautiful thing we had there. It was really beautiful, amazing. We had, poetry nights and Latin jazz nights, and gay men in the Bronx rented the space. And the Nietas, the Kings, and Zulu Nation came to me to ask me could they have their meetings in the building. And I was like, oh, Jesus Christ. So I said, well, we got to talk about this. So Bam says, okay. So Bam sets up a meeting. And I go in the theater, and it's Bam. It wasn't King Tone, but it was somebody from the Kings, some of them nietas, all in the building at the same time, talking, discussing whether Zulu was going to come to this section of the Bronx. And I walk in the room and they're like, Steve, talk about this, you know, like. And I just remember being, and he's like 200 brothers in the room from all different sides. And I just kind of got up and was like, look, this is my building, this is our building here. You know, I'm willing to give you a space, but y'all can't be up in here acting crazy. Like, I can't have it. Like, I really, kids come here during the day, like, I really can't have it. So we had that type of environment, and it was amazing. It was a really beautiful thing to see that mixture of me turning into an activist, which I always remembered, and doing theater with it in the Bronx. You know.
And we was paying the bills.
The first year, we were on unemployment, and I was teaching like poetry classes on the side. But once it was really up and running, yeah, that was our life.
For a few years?
It was our life for 7 years, and then our relationship with our two partners got real funky. And it's a longer story, but we left. And the only thing we had was universes.
So you had started universes in that?
We started, and that became an issue to the building. Like, oh, you guys are making money on the side. I was like, we ain't making no money on the side. We're doing universes because it's fun.
Right.
And to them, it got, because we started to get a little name for ourselves. But you don't make any money. Look, somebody paid us $100. I was like, it was 5 of us. We split $100. But they got really threatening. It became this whole big thing. And so,
what was the play that you did then?
We did something called The Ride. And it was like in this downtown, funky New York. The Ride. R-I-D-E. Some funky play we did. Real, you know, just us kind of just putting stuff together. But what happened was, there was a space called PS 122, Performance Space 122, which is really known in the New York downtown performance scene. The guy who runs it saw us and booked us. He came up to the Point and he saw us, which is the name of our center, and he saw us before we left and booked Universes that night. And he took us to this performance space.
The center was in which streets?
Mine or
this Point?
The Point was in Hunts Point, Barreto, Monida, and Monida Street. Hunts Point and Monida. And
this is Bronx.
This is the Bronx. And then this guy came up from Manhattan, saw us, and took us to his space. And that's how we started to get a bigger name for ourselves, because this guy saw us and thought we were really interesting. And so when we left the Point, we just focused all of our energies on making universes work.
So you did The Ride and what other?
We did The Ride, and then our first big hit, we did this play called Slanguage, which I was in 2001.
And what was that?
That was about the evolution of language in our communities, is what it was about. So how you go from slang to how we learn, Puerto Ricans and Spanish people learn English. It was just sort of this thing of poetry and music, but it was all about how we learn language, how we use language, how we flip language, how you don't say autobus, you say guagua. You know, it's like the way people from the hood take language and flip it. And it was a big hit. The New York Times came and reviewed our show and was like, this is an amazing theater company. And instantly, like that, since the New York Times said it, we became this theater company.
So that was like your first promotional?
Yeah, we got a lot of,
New York Times.
yeah, and we toured for 8 years with that show.
Signage?
Like, we were colleges, performance spaces, we were just everywhere. We weren't making a ton of money, but we were touring. And that's all we did. Like, you know, we didn't take a job, we did universes.
Now, did you look up to other groups? I mean, did you have some?
Well, you know, there's a group.
role models?
There's a group called Culture Clash. Culture Clash. They're out of LA. They're Chicano, but they are. They're like vaudevillian actors from the neighborhood. You know what I mean? And they were so talented, and we just like, those dudes are it. But we're really, for us, it was like musicians we looked up to, poets, Amiri Baraka, Pedro Pietri out of New York. That FA movement, we came out of that. So that's like Miguel Agarin, all of those people downtown, Mikey Pinheiro, that's where we come from. We were like the next generation right after them. So all of our early stuff, Universes working, we were in the poetry scene. We weren't even really doing theater. We were all in the poetry scene and open mics. So that's where our heroes were. Sandra Maria Esteves, Willie Perdomo. They really shaped us, criticized us, pushed us, and we got our swagger at the New Yorican.
And what about before America? Were there some other plays?
No, it was Slanguage, and then Mildred and I did another play called Eyewitness Blues about a trumpet player, and then we did Ameriville.
And how did that come about?
Ameriville came about, we were trying to write something about the history of fear in America. We were trying to write a play. And in the middle of trying to write about the history of fear in America, Katrina happened. And sitting there looking at how the country responded, just the whole thing around it, it was just like, so we wrote this piece, the opening 10-minute piece of Ameriville about that. And that's all we were going to write. And then our director, who we were working with at the time, heard that piece and said, "This is your show. You should write it about what happened in New Orleans and then open it out to the whole country." So we were like, all right, whatever. We didn't want to do it, but we opened it out and it turned into something. He was right. Something really, we thought, smart. So we did that. And that became a big hit.
And what about Party People that you performed today and premiered today?
Party People was, Oregon Shakespeare Festival here has a separate slot that they call the American Revolution cycle, where they commissioned 22 writers to write about moments of change in American history. When we first premiered Ameriville in Louisville, Kentucky, the people who were in charge of American Revolutions came to Kentucky and saw us and said, "We want you guys to write one." So we were like, "Okay, cool. What do you," and they're like, "Could you write about the Bill of Rights? Could you write about the Declaration of Independence?" And we were like, "That's not really interesting." They said, "Well, you guys can write about whatever you want." So we went and we sat and thought about, if you think about American Revolution, what's American Revolution to us? And we were going to keep it real. We were like, really, the Black Panthers and Young Lords, really.
And that comes from your Bronx.
That comes from my Bronx upbringing, Mildred being in the Lower East Side. We were always around it.
The Young Lords and
the Young Lords and the Black. So we felt like that's seeing it personally and being recipients of the programs of free breakfast. We saw it, of the garbage pickups in New York, at least, and Lincoln Hospital. I grew up really close to Lincoln Hospital, so it was like, I know, I saw it. I remember what Lincoln Hospital looked before, and then I remember it afterwards. So we were like, if we were really going to write about something, we should do. If we were going to be honest to ourselves, it's that. We don't know how we're going to do it, but that's what we should write about. And when we told them, they were like, well, okay, go ahead. And then that's when we started trying to find people. That's how we found you. Because we were like, well, we're just going to start, because we knew that we had access to the New York chapter of the Young Lords. So we were like, we're not going to call them. We need to go to the source. So we were like, we got to go to Chicago, and we have to find Cha-Cha. That was our main, was like, well, who do we know who knows him? Who knows, you know? And so Mildred literally looked and called you, you know. But we knew we had to go. We went to you, and then we went to Oakland. We didn't talk to anybody in New York to like last. Really, we said we have to go to the sources of both, not here. That's too easy. We have to know exactly where it comes from. And you just happened to pick up the phone, and that started that process. And what we learned from that process, hanging out with you that first time, and then going to Oakland and getting that, you know what I mean? And then bringing that here and then working it into a play. You know?
So the play is about what? Can you kind of describe it a little bit?
The play is about, if you want to, it's about two young, I would call them, one is a cub, panther cub, and the other one is the nephew of a young lord who grew up in New York. And them trying to decipher all of the history and make sense out of it, but in their way now. So it's a little misguided, and they're trying to put an event together and invite some panthers and lords together for this thing. Now, us doing our research, we've discovered, which I kind of knew, there's certain people you can't be in a room together. There's history there. So we were like, well, what happens if we put people in a room together? We saw footage one day where we were doing research. We were looking at online, and we found, I think it was the 40th anniversary of the New York chapter. and they were all in this back room. And they said, and now, young lords. And the door opens, and you can see people coming out of the back. But people's faces, some people were smiling, some people weren't smiling. You can see that something went on in the back. And I remember thinking, what went on in the back? I want to know what that conversation was. And so when we started to talk to people and see the complexity of what relationships are, and how some shit that got said 25 years ago, people didn't get over it, or people got history, or when COINTELPRO, and you just don't know who is who. So we're like, well, what happens if you throw some people back in the mix together who haven't seen each other in a while? What comes out in the conversations? Being orchestrated by these two kids who know and totally have no idea what they're doing, but they're trying to figure it out. And so they're taking what they learn and they flip it to the elders, and the elders respond. Or they get taken to different places and different things flash. That's what the play is about. But it's for me, I wanted to show, I didn't want to romanticize the 60s. And what I mean by that is I wanted to talk to or see characters who composites of Young Lords and Panthers now. Like, I remember when we met you and just what it was like talking to an older gentleman. We weren't talking to the cha-cha in the papers. We were talking to a man who's already lived a long life and what your perspective was on that life. So it was like, that's interesting to me. That's who the American public needs to know. What they went through, what the sacrifice was for this life. If you romanticize the 60s in this, you see black and white and people with berets on and it looks very sexy. It's like, no, you see somebody who's gone through this and they've had this happen, this happened, this happened, and they're still here. And they're trying to make sense of all the stuff they've gone through. So you got that complexity with these two kids trying to figure out what it is smashed together. That's what this play's about.
Okay. And it's going to play here for...
It's going to play here till November 3rd. And then we'll see what happens. There's a lot of theaters coming to check it out. New York, Chicago, Berkeley, LA. They're all coming down. So you hope they like it, So...
Okay. Any concluding thoughts?
I am proud of the work that Universal does as a company. I'm proud of the fact that we were very honest with ourselves about what we wanted to tell in this type of story. I'm proud of the research that we did, that we actually went and talked to folk, and that we had the guts to bring it to an American stage. And it's very complicated. It's not an easy thing to sit and watch. It's not very celebratory all the time. Everybody gets sort of exposed in their own way. It's a very complicated issue. But I'm very proud of the fact that we went for it. You know what I mean? And I hope for the world to see this, to learn who you guys are the way we do as human beings that are very complex and very interesting. Is that, and what you guys did is a part of American history, period. You know what I mean? It's not, American history is not just reserved for, like, this is a part of American history, an important part of American history that if you remove it, there's a lot of things that would not be here if this did not happen. And we laid claim to that, and I'm proud that we did it.
We're very grateful that you're doing that.
Thank you.